Hello, this is Dave Sugarbaker, and today is the third day of September 2023. And I have a brief reading from Matthew, the 23rd chapter. Now, if I was reading from something like King James Version, it would say, "Woe to you, Pharisees and scribes." It doesn't say that in this version. This is the New English Version. And it starts out like this: "You Pharisees and teachers are show-offs, and you are in for trouble. You give God a tenth of the spices from your garden, such as mint and dill and cumin, yet you neglect the more important matters of the law, such as justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These are the important things that you should have done, though you should not have left the others undone either. You blind leaders, you strain out a small fly, but swallow a camel. You wash the outside of your cups and dishes, while inside there is nothing but greed and selfishness. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup, and then the outside will also be clean. In the mid-70s, Channel 2 in Oakland, California, needed a place to hold a community service recognition luncheon for about 200 staff and local dignitaries and others related to the station. They contacted Northbrae Church in Berkeley, where I was the minister, and we had a large hall that would hold such a crowd. Since they were meeting at Northbrae, the planners thought it would be a good idea to invite the minister to attend and to offer an invocation. And I said I would be glad to. Now, some background first. From 1953 to 1994, that was a long time, there was a television program for preschoolers called Romper Room. Local stations would broadcast the franchised program with cute local toddlers attending. The host was a Miss Mary Ann. I'm not sure whether that was her name in every one of these franchises, but I had the impression that everyone who was hosting this show took the name Miss Mary Ann. In any case, there was a local young woman who was the Miss Mary Ann for Channel 2, who would shepherd the toddlers through the program's agenda. The day arrived for the Channel 2 luncheon, and I was seated at the head table next to Miss Mary Ann. After my largely ceremonial invocation, I sat down, and Miss Mary Ann wasted no time. She pounced, and she said, "What kind of minister are you?" And I was tempted to tell her that I was a good minister. But instead, I explained that Northbrae was a community church in the broadest sense of the word, open to people from a variety of religious backgrounds. And I explained that I was personally a Christian. "Well," she said, "do you believe in the bodily resurrection of the righteous dead?" What? It was clear that she was checking out whether I was an acceptable kind of Christian, according to her definition of the term. "Do you believe in the second coming? Are you ready for the rapture?" In some circumstances, I would have given her an answer that was no answer at all. But she was coming on pretty strong, and I decided not to tiptoe around her. And so this is what I said: "I don't know what God has planned for the future. I figured that's God's business, not mine. I don't know anything about the second coming. I don't think anybody knows anything about the second coming. But there sure are a lot of theories out there. But I believe that God is a God of love, and He will take care of us in the future, just as God takes care of us in the present and took care of us in the past. I can leave it at that. Miss Mary Ann had a whole list of test questions that she posed to me, all of which convinced her that I was not on her team. My beliefs just didn't measure up to her standards. And finally, Miss Mary Ann drew herself up. Now, I didn't know anybody sitting down could draw themselves up, but she did. She drew herself up and declared, "Well, I'm going to heaven. And when I get there, I'm going to look around and see if you made it." That's been a favorite memory and story of mine. But before we go on, it's important to remember the definition of a Pharisee. From 150 years prior to the time of Jesus until 2 centuries after the time of Jesus, the Pharisees were an important facet of Judaism. There were 2 other sects at the time, and they were the Sadducees and the Essenes. So these 3 sects, Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, each had a special, different perspective on Jewish law, on the Jewish scriptures, and on Jewish faith and practice. The Pharisees were a kind of middle-class movement, whereas the Sadducees were priestly and aristocratic. The Essenes were not entirely monastic, but many Essenes withdrew from society to enclaves out in the borders of the Dead Sea. Now, the Pharisees were pretty prevalent in the time of Jesus, and 3 of them figured in the Christian movement, the earliest Christian movement. One of them was Nicodemus. A second one, Joseph of Arimathea. And the third one, we all know, the Apostle Paul, before he converted to Christianity, was a Pharisee. At the time of Jesus, some portion of the Pharisees had gotten carried away with things, and they were fixated on following every last bit of the Jewish law, thereby demonstrating that they had earned God's special favor. They were especially righteous. Jesus called them self-righteous. They thought of themselves as the especially chosen ones within God's chosen people. These were the people Jesus was most critical of. He called them blind guides, hypocrites, and a brood of vipers. They were outwardly religious, playing a holier-than-thou game. Pope Francis was in Portugal recently, and he had a sit-down with Jesuits in the area in Portugal in which he was visiting, and he had some comments on Christianity in America. He said if Jesus were to visit America today, he would discover a new crop of Pharisees who've lost the vitality of faith and have retreated into worshiping ideologies. That was his word. Some American religious leaders got a little huffy with Francis about this comment. They say Francis doesn't know America very well, and therefore he shouldn't be making statements about religion in America. I happen to think Pope Francis knew exactly what he was saying. He knows what a Pharisee was at the time of Jesus, and he could see the same misplaced self-righteousness in American religion today. Miss Mary Ann was one of those new Pharisees. She was exhibiting that Pharisaic self-righteousness. And I looked up self-righteousness. Here's what it said. Self-righteousness is a feeling or display of moral superiority derived from a sense that one's beliefs, one's actions, or affiliations are of greater virtue than those of others. And then there's a kind of a product warning included in the definition. It says, self-righteous individuals are often intolerant of the opinions and behaviors of others. It all reminds me of the concern of a former Southern Baptist leader who heard that some conservative church members are rejecting the teaching of Jesus because it's too weak. You know, that turn the other cheek stuff. Jesus isn't macho enough for them. They think their beliefs, actions, and affiliations are of greater virtue than the beliefs, actions, and affiliations of others. Rather than wrestling with the challenges of their faith and perhaps growing from the experience, they retreat into their ideology. For Pharisees old and new, it's a matter of appearance. One doesn't want to appear weak. It's important to be perceived as righteous by other Pharisees. The Pharisees are concerned with the outside, while Jesus tells his followers what's important is on the inside. The Pharisees are all about appearing holy or spouting the right ideology, while Jesus puts the priority on our motivation. The difference between the fancy prayer and the other man praying at the synagogue, Jesus paints a picture of the two of them. He says the fancy prayer was out standing in the middle of the synagogue, loudly spouting an ornate prayer so that he could gain a reputation as a really spiffy prayer. And on the other hand, in this picture that Jesus paints, is another person in the corner who won't even lift his eyes up to heaven, quietly saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Now, Jesus says that the second prayer is the one that is heard by God. The first prayer wasn't really addressed to God anyway. Now, God bless you. If you find value in these things, I'd encourage you to share it, to pass it along to somebody else who might also appreciate it. Stay safe. I have 2 members of one of my churches who just came down with COVID, and another one just recently, this morning, diagnosed. So it's still out there, and be careful. God bless.